Hello again, grade 10, and welcome to your English subject. And we'll be talking about two topics today. One is linear narrative structure, and the other is the life and works of James Joyce. I'll be showing you two videos. The first video will give an idea of the linear narrative structure, then we will go to the actual lecture. But for the next part, we will just watch a video to give you an idea of the life and works of James Joyce, one of English's literature's very prolific author and writer as well. Now, moving towards this, let me show you first the video done by Khan Academy on the elements of a story, which actually explains the linear narrative structure as clear as it is. Okay, so before anything, might as well um, put in some of your devices out first. Please stop looking at other devices so that you can focus on watching this particular video. Okay, so I will just leave you for a few minutes and then come back for our lecture. Okay, please watch this video.
Hello, readers. I'm going to draw you a map right now, and it's going to look like I've drawn a mountain. But it's not a map of a mountain, it's a map of a story. What? You're saying, how do you map a story? What makes a story pointy? These are great questions, and to answer them, I'll say this. Today we're going to talk about the elements of a story, or the parts that make it up, like ingredients in a recipe. Many stories follow a similar pattern. Good readers know what these patterns are and can talk about them using the right terms, and this helps everyone be on the same page, so to speak, when you discuss or write about the stories you read. I'm about to drop a lot of vocabulary on you, so brace yourselves. The story begins with exposition, where we learn about the characters and the setting. Then we introduce a conflict, or a big problem. As the characters begin to interact with the conflict or try to solve the problem, we enter rising action, this upward slope of the story mountain. When the conflict comes to a head, we hit the most exciting part of the story, the climax. Here, the conflict can't go any further. We're at the top of the mountain. There's nowhere else to go except down. After the climax, after this most exciting part of the story, we enter falling action. The climax will happen much closer to the end of the story than to the middle. It's not a symmetrical mountain. The action slows down, the problem has been solved, or maybe the problem has changed, and the characters prepare for the last phase of story, the resolution. This is where we tie up loose ends, characters reflect on what they learned, maybe set up a sequel. Now, look, that was a lot of information all at once. In order to make sense of it, let's apply all of those terms to a story. Now, our go-to has been the Three Little Pigs, and while that's a story everyone knows, I'm starting to think it needs to be freshened up a little bit, really work on its franchise potential, you know? So let's go through the elements of story by looking at my new project, a reboot of Three Little Pigs, that I'm calling TLP Starbound. See, it's Three Little Pigs, but it's in space. That's a space helmet. So I'm going to put a little story map here in the corner. Okay, so, the exposition. It's the future. Pigs have expanded to every corner of the galaxy. Three brave little pigs decide to strike out on their own, exploring a new, exciting region of space. One builds a spaceship out of straw. Go with me here. One builds a spaceship out of twigs. And one builds a spaceship out of a flexible hyperalloy they developed in a laboratory. She's the brainy pig. So, we've got the setting. It's the future, they're in space. We've got our characters, the pigs. Now, the conflict. Along comes the notorious space pirate, Captain Wolf. He's big, he's bad. He wants to blow up the spaceships and eat the pigs. He begins hunting down the pig ships one at a time. I think Captain Wolf has an eye patch. No, he has a cyber eye. He's part robot. And now we enter our rising action phase. Captain Wolf engages the straw ship. They have an exciting space battle. Pew, 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 pew. And Straw Pig escapes in a little escape pod to the twig ship. But Captain Wolf follows. He is undaunted. The tension continues to rise. He destroys the twig ship. The two pigs escape again, this time to the brick house. I mean, the hot, flexible hyperalloy spaceship piloted by the science pig. And now we come to the climax. Captain Wolf comes to the advanced ship. He tries to blow it up, but he can't. It's too powerful. He decides to board the ship, because that's the only way he'll get to eat the pigs, but the pigs trap him in a space barrel while he's still in the airlock. They did it! They solved the problem. Captain Wolf is trapped in a space barrel, and he can't eat them now. The climax is past, and now we enter the falling action phase of the story. In the version of the story that I know, the three little pigs roll the barrel into the river. So I think maybe in this version they punt the space barrel out the airlock into the cold void of space. Or maybe they strand him on a deserted planet. But in any case, they never have to deal with the wolf again. The threat is now gone, and that means that the conflict has been resolved. We're in the resolution part of the story now. The first two little pigs, the straw ship pig and the twig ship pig, learn that they need to put more work into their spaceships if they want to survive in space. And they build fancy spaceships just like the science pig. And that's an introduction to story elements. Now that you're familiar with the ideas, start applying them to your favorite stories. You can do this with any form of media: books, comics, TV shows, movies, games. What's the conflict? How is it resolved? Once you start looking for story structure in entertainment, you will find it everywhere. Let us know what you see. You can learn anything. David out.
Okay, so as you see, that's the picture of what is linear narrative structure. And honestly, honest to goodness, by the way, uh, this style of storytelling is the most common of all the forms of storytelling. Now, moving on to the linear narrative structure, and as we breeze through some of the facts that needed to be discussed, learning competency, explain the stations from linear to non-linear text and vice versa. Identify parts of text using linear narrative structure. Why should we tell stories in an organized way? So whether it's linear or linear structure, it's still organized. And the reason for that is for you to have a good storyline. Now for the vocabulary words, we have arbor, a garden structure formed with pillars and roof made of wooden framework with climbing vines. In the olden days, young ladies often met with their sweethearts in golden arbor. Next is exquisite, beautiful and delicate. The bride's white and sheer veil was made of most exquisite cloth. Next is bower, a shady place under trees or garden plants. Because it was such a hot day, Benjamin decided to take a break within the bower. Next is vehement, a display of strong emotion or passion. Elaine loved the new book by her favorite author so much that she spoke of it with vehemence. Next is sheath, a case in container, usually of reinforced leather or for a blade. Although the craftsmanship of a blade takes precedence, one must also choose the appropriate sheath for it, what you call sheath. So arbor, exquisite bower, vehement sheath. Of all of these words, which do you think is your most used and less used words? Hopefully, you can use some of the words here in your speaking and writing. The narrative structure, the form of the story, the manner of presenting the elements of the story. Another term for narrative structure is what's called P&T or plot. However, the third term is also used to refer to an element of narrative that means an action in the story. Now, the linear plot is the traditional narrative structure, and that is what you saw in the first video by Khan Academy. It is also the following parts: exposition, rise in action, climax, following action, denouement, or resolution. So it is like a triangle going up and going down. So the parts of a linear narrative, you have exposition, characters, protagonist, antagonist, setting, time, social climate, mood. Then you have writing action, you have the conflict development, man versus man, brand versus nature, man versus self, and man versus society, which was discussed in an earlier lecture. Next is the climax, the peak or the turning point, and then the following action, the conflict outcome, and then the resolution, the conflict resolution on the story. A story will always have a start, a climax, and for this, there are so many stories around that we can have as an example. But there's an author that we'll be looking at today, and let's look at his life and work. And many of what he did was of excellent work in literature as well. So let's look at the life of James Joyce. James Joyce. So please uh, give time. Please be ready to just have time for this, and please watch this video. Be attentive to the details, and if uh, possible, make it point to look at some of the details. Maybe some of the questions on your paper will be relevant to what is being shown here on the paper. Okay, so let me just check if I already set it well. Yes, let me just set it well, and let me just show you this short video on this.
James Joyce is one of the most revered writers in the English language and a central figure in the history of the novel. He is still hugely important to us because of his devotion to some crucial themes: the idea of the grandeur of ordinary life, his determination to portray what actually goes on through our heads moment by moment, what we now know, partly thanks to him, as the stream of consciousness, and his determination to capture on the page what language really sounds like in our own minds. Born in 1882, James Joyce spent the first 20 years of his life in and around Dublin, and the rest wandering in and between the European cities of Trieste, Zurich, and Paris. In 3 decades, he published 2 books of poetry, 1 collection of short stories, 1 play, and 3 novels, all of them different in scope and scale, but sharing one thing in common: Dublin, a city he loved and hated. Each of my books, he once explained to a friend, is a book about Dublin. Dublin is a city of scarcely 300,000, but it has become the universal city in my work. At the end of the 19th century, Dublin was the second city of the British Empire. Like his father, Joyce was fiercely opposed to Ireland's status as a British colony and supported the cause of Irish independence. Joyce was educated by the Jesuits and early on at school began to reveal his knack for foreign languages. By the time he arrived at University College Dublin, Joyce was writing book reviews, poems, and short stories. But he also needed to find a career. He tried medical school in Paris, but spent more time in brothels and bars than the library. In 1904, he met a young woman from Galway named Nora Barnacle, who was uneducated but highly erotic and compelling to Joyce. When she first saw him, she thought he was a Nordic seaman with electric blue eyes, a yachting cap, and plimsolls. But when he spoke, well then, I knew him at once for just another worthless Dublin boaster trying to chat up a country girl. But Nora fell in love with him nevertheless and remained devoted through all their difficult years of life together. After a few months, Nora agreed to follow Joyce to Europe for a self-imposed exile, free from the morality of the Catholic Church and the subjugation of the British Empire. They eventually landed in Trieste, an Austro-Hungarian port town where they would spend the next 10 years, raising 2 children, both of them given Italian names, Lucia and Giorgio. Joyce eked out a meagre existence as a language teacher at the Berlitz School and translating Irish writers like Yeats and Oscar Wilde into Italian. 1914 turned out to be Joyce's year of breakthrough when a publisher in London finally decided to bring out his book of short stories, Dubliners, which had been rejected 22 times, and the American poet Ezra Pound arranged to get his novel A Portrait of the Artist serialized. This was followed by the serialization of Ulysses in 1918, the novel which made Joyce's name around the world. For the next 23 years, Joyce's reputation grew, and he took his experiments with language and literary form ever further, until his unexpected and sudden death in Zurich in 1941. He was buried in Flunton Cemetery, just near Zurich's main zoo. Joyce's principal work, Ulysses, is named after the most dramatic adventure story the ancient Greeks handed down to Western civilization. It is seen as a pinnacle of high culture and tells the story of the long wanderings of the hero, Ulysses, on his journey back from the siege of Troy to Ithaca, his home. But the major character of Joyce's novel is not a warrior king or a grand hero. He is instead a very flawed, quite kindly, and quite foolish man named Leopold Bloom. He works as a minor player in the advertising industry. He's married, but his wife is having an affair. He's been sacked from a string of jobs, and he's very much given to daydreaming about all the things he would love to go right in his life, but which we know won't happen. He farts, he likes looking at women in the street, he dreams of winning competitions in weekly magazines and of owning a cottage by the sea. Being Jewish, he's a bit of an outsider in Catholic Dublin, and there are various little humiliations which he has to put up with all the time. Bloom is very unlike a traditional hero, but he is representative of our average, unimpressive, fragile, but still rather likable everyday selves. Joyce lavishes attention on Leopold Bloom. He treats him as deeply worthy of respect and immense interest. He's someone, Joyce suggests, that we should learn from and try in certain ways to be like, just as, in the ancient world, Ulysses was held up as an inspiring model of resourceful and brave conduct. We follow Bloom for a whole day as he wanders around Dublin. We see him having lunch, buying his supper, drinking coffee and cocoa. He worries about his relationship with his wife and daughter. He goes to work. He listens to someone singing. He has various conversations. Joyce is saying that the apparently little things that happen in daily life, eating, feeling sorry for someone, feeling sorry for oneself, putting the washing on the clothesline, these aren't really little things at all. If we look at them through the right lens, they are revealed as beautiful, serious, deep, and fascinating. Our own lives are just as interesting as those of the traditional heroes. It's just we're less good at appreciating them. The helpful lens is supplied initially by Joyce's novel, but ideally we should internalize it and make it our own. We should accept ourselves as minor, legitimate heroes of our own dignified lives. Traditionally, novels, like most films today, show us people speaking in well-formulated, clear, and relevant sentences. And we tend to suppose, without really thinking about it, that this is a fair reflection of their inner life. They speak the thoughts and feelings that they have. But this isn't Joyce's way at all. Joyce takes us into our minds and tries to show us what thinking actually sounds like. At one point in Ulysses, Leopold muses on the cycle of life while he's watching the tramcars and people in the street. This is what it sounds like through Joyce's microphone. Trams passed one another, ingoing, outgoing, clanging, clanging, useless words. Things go on the same day after day. Squads of police marching out, back, trams in, out. Those two loonies mooching about. Dignam carted off. Minor Purefoy's swollen belly on a bed, groaning to have a child tugged out of her. One born every second somewhere, other dying every second. Since I fed the birds, 5 minutes. 300 kick the bucket, other 300 born, washing the blood off, all are washed in the blood of the lamb, bawling, ma. It's a strange and yet actually perhaps rather familiar muddle of high and low concerns. Bloom is thinking about birth and death and the random shortness of life and the idea of religion, but he's also thinking about how he fed some birds, the ordinary rhythms of daily life, the noisy trams, and the fundamental oddity of language, in which sounds we make with our mouths stand for things in the world. If we could slice the top off people's heads and get a view into the diverse thoughts that circulate and cut across one another, contradicting and confusing, we'd have a much more accurate picture of our fellow humans, and one radically at odds with the image we typically have, that people are psychological monoliths with clear, definite, and fixed views, who are very certain what they believe and care about. Joyce, like other modernist describers of stream of consciousness thoughts and feelings, is suggesting that if we knew more about what others and ourselves really thought and felt, we'd have a clearer sense of what it means to be human. And we'd perhaps also be slower to anger, quicker to forgive. We'd love more and hate less. We'd be more curious about the apparently strange byways of our own and others' minds. The more Joyce went beneath the surface of our utterances to reveal the cacophony of our minds, the more he felt the need to twist and remold language itself to capture how we sound to ourselves. In his last and truly puzzling novel, Finnegans Wake, Joyce decided to create his own version of English, a Tower of Babel, he called it, by mixing together bits and pieces of more than 40 languages. Sometimes the words on the page look entirely foreign, but if you sound them out, you can often find the sense. Here we are again means what it says. It's just that the words are jammed together to reflect the speed of the mind in action. Joyce went in for many portmanteau words, two or more words stuck together to create a new one. A fun-for-all is a fun funeral or a fun for all. A bisexcycle is a bisexual or a bicycle for sex. Joyce twisted prestigious names, so Shakespeare became Shake His Beard, and Dente Alligator was Dante Alighieri. The plot, insofar as there is one in Finnegans Wake, is about a man called Tim Finnegan, who falls from a ladder, dies, and comes back to life when someone spills whiskey on his face during the wake. It's intended as a universal story about the fall of mankind, and the character of Tim Finnegan is also meant to be, simultaneously, Adam, Noah, Richard III, Napoleon, and the Irish nationalist Charles Parnell. There is indeed a plot in this book, it's just not one, Joyce explained sarcastically, that can be rendered sensible by the use of wide-awake language, cut-and-dry grammar, and go-ahead plot. In attempting to be completely faithful to real life, in all its true confusion and complexity, Joyce ended up writing a book that is fascinatingly, instructively unreadable. The fourth sentence of the first chapter runs like this. Rot a peg of Par's malt, had gem or shen brewed by arclight and rory end to the reggin brow, was to be seen ringsome on the aqua face. It's a reminder of how much fiction, when it seems logical and understandable, is always necessarily a drastic foreshortening of what is actually going on in the world and the minds of characters. Joyce pushed one possibility of the realistic novel as far as it could possibly go, into a realm as mysterious, haunting, and perplexing as the dreams of a stranger. Joyce spent the greater part of his life writing. What was he hoping to achieve through his art? What is art for? In his novel, The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, Joyce gets his spokesman Stephen to have a go at spelling out an answer. He follows a surprisingly traditional route, using two terms from the medieval philosopher St. Thomas Aquinas. The first is integritas. This means that an artist is someone who attempts to grasp with unusual vigor the true integrity and identity of what is being studied. It might be a tree, a moment of history, or the life of a fictional character in 20th century Dublin. We don't normally do this. We don't really concentrate on what a person is saying or doing, or what objects around us really are and look like. We don't normally isolate and study carefully. Art has the job of doing this for us and teaching us to do so habitually. The second step for an artist, in Joyce's view, is to bring claritas or clarity to things, which means shining the light of reason into the murkier parts of experience and life. The paradox is that Joyce did just this, but in his attempt to be utterly clear about what being human is actually like, he created works which are in places utterly baffling to a reader in a hurry. That shouldn't surprise us too long, though. Art, as Joyce sees it, should be a corrective to our natural but dangerous blindness and inattention. to cliche and over rapid summary. If art sometimes puzzles us, we know, says Joyce, that it's doing its job properly. It's reawakening us to the mysteries we have too quickly grown blind to.
Okay, so that is the life and works of James Joyce. It also gave an idea of who he is. And it's also good to have those kinds of a background because this gives us a bigger picture of who the author is besides his or her writing. So again, thank you, grade 10, for your precious time. Please proceed to Clipper and please do it now. Do not delay it so that it will not pile up. And again, we'll see you next time in our classes. Thank you.